since brevity is the soul of wit.
More of your conversation would infect my brain.
Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?
To speak of him as my kinsman, he's a most notable coward, an infinite and endless liar, an hourly promise breaker, the owner of no one good quality worthy your lordship's entertainment.
I'd beat thee, but I should infect my hand.
The lady doth protest too much, methinks.
The course of true love never did run smooth.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Aidan.
And this is the Bicks Pod.
Yes, it is.
Welcome back for another rousing discussion of a history play. Wah, wah.
That was a good summary right there, Lindsay. Yes.
But truly, this rounds out the third part of Henry VI.
Yes,
which, if you've been listening, we covered 1 and 2 in the last couple of months. Mm-hmm. We did not like part 1.
Nope.
We greatly liked part 2.
Yep.
And I'm kind of on the fence about part 3. It was not the best. I think if I had to rank them in order of ascending preference,
yes,
it would be part 1, then part 3, then part 2.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Like part 2 being the best.
The best.
Ascending. You're going up in order.
Yeah.
That's what that means.
Yeah. I disagree. I think it was worse than part 1.
Really?
In some
wow.
respects. There are a lot. Let's just say, watching it performed, it does have a bit more allure to me. When I read it, though, I was bored to death by this play. Very much.
I'm flipped on that completely.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't enjoy watching it performed, but I thought reading it was fun.
Huh.
And I no, let's just put it this way. I thought it was easier to read. I thought that it felt, and I don't know why that is. There's maybe some question of authorship going into it. It again feels very much like it's not one hand writing everything. There are some scenes that go on for quite a bit and really hammer home some extended metaphors. The scene with the father and his son and the son and his father and Henry in the middle.
Father of the realm.
Yeah, like I mean it's not the most dramatic, but it's more melodrama than anything.
Yeah.
But I found that the writing, it doesn't reach the great heights of poetic elegance that some of Shakespeare's later plays did, or even that, Henry II had, or sorry, Henry VI Part 2 had. Yeah. But I found it more, it was an easier read.
It is,
and that made it more enjoyable.
Okay, that's fair. It is a fairly quick play to read. There are some scenes that extend quite a bit, but there's also a lot of action. I mean, this is very much similar to part 1 in the sense that there's a ton of battles. I think we counted 6.
This had the most. Well, I think there are 4 staged battles, but there are
other
6
ones referenced.
Yes, battles referenced, and it's the largest number of battles in any of Shakespeare's plays. So that's right here.
Yeah.
Which, as if you listen to our part 1 episode, that is something that I think part 1 suffers from.
Yeah.
Here it's, I think because they're the big named battles of the Wars of the Roses, it's like the Battle of Barnet and the Battle of Tewkesbury, the Battle of St. Albans. Like these are big plays that kind of loom large in the English legend. So maybe that makes it a little bit.
I find the characters are a little more fleshed out in this version, or in this play, especially if you've read parts 1 and 2. You've got a lead up into all the major characters, especially Richard, Duke of York. Henry VI is quite a well-developed character
and
at this
even
point.
even a character like Edward IV, who doesn't really come into play until part 2, and even then it's kind of a marginal role.
Yeah.
You kind of see why he would feel the way he does about and goes about the things that he does. Mm-hmm. Queen Margaret, very similar. So that does make it a little bit more interesting. I think that's part of it too, is that we kind of understand the motivations a bit better, having read the first 2 parts in order. Of course, these plays were not written in order. No. We're presenting them in order for ease of your listening pleasure and our sanity.
Yeah.
But they were not written in order. I think part 2
was generally considered to have been written first.
Yeah.
Then 1, then maybe 3, or 3 and then 1.
Or something like that.
It's not super clear.
We could be wrong on that as well.
Yeah, and there's not a whole lot of documentation to support any particular structure. We've done it this way for the sake of reading it as an enlarged narrative, and I think it kind of works well that way. I think it did help lend a certain air to this, and the BBC production, which is of course the only one that's ever been made about these in their full entire glory, use the same actors throughout. So
it does make it a little bit easier.
It does make it a bit easier, and you do grow attached a little bit more.
What we've missed entirely in the course of this introduction is the 60 or 30-second intro, which is Aidan's turn to do that. So Aidan, do you have the ability, the strength, the wherewithal to give us a 30-second recap?
I think so.
You think so?
Yep.
On your mark, Aidan, you can give us a brief 30-second synopsis of the third part of Henry VI.
So, Richard is Duke of York, and he's sitting on the throne. And Henry's like, hey, that's my throne. And Richard's like, okay, but it's my throne now. And then Henry's like, I'll give you the throne after I die. And Richard's like, okay. Then he leaves. Then Henry's wife wants to take over the throne again. So they fight. Richard takes over the throne, but he dies. So his son, Edward, takes over the throne. He's Edward IV. He reigns for a little bit. Henry gets kicked to Scotland, comes back with an army. Well, his wife does, of course, because he doesn't do much of anything. Takes over again with Warwick, and then he loses and dies, and he's no longer the king. And that was close.
That's not bad. Not bad.
I always start too detailed and then fall into like just general, things happened. I need more practice at these, I think.
I think you do. I think you need to work on your brevity. Brevity is the soul of wit, as Shakespeare said.
Yes, he did.
But no, that's not bad. I mean, you did spend 15 seconds of that on scene 1, but that's okay.
It's a good scene. Okay. It kind of sets everything in motion.
It does.
There, so.
But yeah, generally this play it starts where part 2 ends. It starts with the first Battle of St. Albans, which kicks off the War of the Roses proper, which was 1455.
Was it?
Yes, because the Battle of Bosworth Field was 1485, and this lasted for 30 years.
Okay.
So
sure.
I can do math.
You're very good.
So it starts there, and it kind of takes you through to about 1471, I think. So really, the action of the play takes place over about 16 years, which.
But it's only 3.5 hours, of course.
Yeah,
and that
of course.
is a problem.
But it is a bit of a problem. But I don't know. I guess if you're looking at this allegorically, which you kind of have to do, and it's how most productions approach it, which is something I kind of want to get into when we talk about the battle scenes. Mm-hmm. You kind of have to look at this as less of a literal interpretation, because like there's one scene where Edward IV has just gotten married, but then he's already got a kid.
Well, he's not even married
yet. He's not even married.
He's
like,
married in a couple scenes later. Yeah.
The intention is for him to get married, and then his uncle Richard his brother Richard, who becomes Richard III, is already talking about Edward's son
being in the way of his.
Yeah. So I mean, this is all stuff that that is problematic from a historical standpoint, but nobody goes to Shakespeare to look for pure history, do they?
No, of course not. And to be fair, it does have dramatic license, but I mean, things like that were really noticeable, and they kind of just distract from the kind of arching narrative being told, which is one of civil strife. And it's not painful, or it's not, it doesn't really like hurt you in any way to watch like, oh, this has such a big plot hole, because you realize none of that really matters. It is the Civil War. It is this measure for measure vengeance that really drives so much of the story and the characters in this particular play. So
it doesn't really need to be historically accurate.
Exactly.
That's what I mean when I say it's read for allegory. Like you're looking at this as like a family, really a family dynastic. Do you see I portmanteaued those? I phanasticked those. It's a phanastical squabble.
It is.
Between the Lancasters and the Yorks. Mm-hmm. So really it doesn't matter. And in the end, it is, as Aidan says, it's a measure for measure, eye for an eye, up until the midpoint of the play when you get introduced to the monomaniacal Richard, who ends up becoming Richard III.
His vengeance is with God. You kind of get the sense. Nothing can really take the place of the injustice that was done to him at birth, right?
So I think let's talk first about the strengths of the play. Yeah. What do you think, Aidan, are the biggest strengths of this play? I
think that warlike structure works better here, the back and forth and the backstabbings and battles. Yeah. I think it works better here, and I can't tell in comparison to part 1. Yeah. And I can't tell if that's just because I was prepared for it after watching part 1, which followed a similar structure of a battle over here and someone wins, and then a battle over there and the other team wins, and it was this back and forth kind of structure. But also it works better in this sense because you are a little more familiar with the characters, and the characters' motivations are a little clearer. It's not just war on France for glory's sake and the kingdom of England. It is personal feuds. It is you killed my father, prepare to die kind of stuff, right? So it has a certain a more thicker pull, I would say.
I'd agree with you. I think I was going to say the same thing that where part one kind of struggles is with these back and forth battle scenes that I didn't mind so much here. And I think it's because we have very clear sides. Not that we didn't in part one. It was the French and the English. It was just more nebulous, right? Because you had these figures who rise to the top. You have like Joan of Arc, and you have the English Talbot, who are kind of representative of their side struggles, but they're not as captivating as
any of the
Edward IV and Queen Margaret, who is really the defender of the Lancastrian side. And I definitely want to talk about Queen Margaret here, but
Cersei is a very interesting.
To come back to the Game of Thrones. We got to come back to
Game of Thrones first.
So I think it's just having those struggles clearly delineated in not nation versus nation, but this is one family versus another family, and you have very clear and very strong personalities at the heads of both of those families for all intents and purposes. I think that makes it more engaging.
Yes.
I also think what it picks up from part two was really about that court intrigue that we talked about, that is
leading into the war.
Which is really interesting, and marks off all of the best of Shakespeare's later court plays or royal plays, I guess. Even, the
Hamlets and stuff.
The tragedies, right? It's all about the backstabbing that happens with courtiers, and that's what part two has. Here you have that a bit with a character like Warwick, who you can see how the personal becomes political, or how the political becomes personal in varying degrees. You get that a bit with some of the things that happen with Queen Margaret, with Louis, the King of France, and his daughter Princess Bona.
But it's not as nuanced, and it doesn't have because it has the immediacy of, well, there has to be a battle now to solve this political intrigue that we've created, and then it's immediately thrown into a war with a clear winner, and then it comes back.
And I think that's why it's kind of a mix between part one and two, and I think that's why I put it in between those two, because it kind of melds. It takes the best of both. I think, well, not really the best of part one, but it takes elements of both, and it doesn't quite reach the heights of part two, but it's not doesn't sink to the lows of part one.
No, and the other thing I thought it did well, but not as well as part two again, is this kind of question of kingship and the source of power again, and that was very much the source of a lot of interest for me in part two. Part three also addresses it primarily through Henry as this kind of powerful figure. He's just he's a mute figure politically, but he has this deep, intense kind of insight into the nature of kingship and ruling, but also just what is good.
He's a deeply moral character, isn't he? Right,
in this totally amoral period. Right?
And I think that's what makes I found myself feeling way more sympathy for Henry, whereas before I felt like he was very ineffectual, and we've talked about this on the podcast, that he was kind of a pathetic figure. But we're also reading this through a lens of a culture that has been deeply ingrained with these war heroes, and Winston Churchill and General Patton and all of these great military figures who loom very large in the Western legend, the Western mind, consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. So it's hard to see the virtue, I guess, of a king who
doesn't want
to be a king, and we get this great monologue that Henry delivers about how he wishes if only he could be a shepherd, and to have white hairs lead him to a grave, right? Not an early grave, as he's probably going to feel as a king, right? Like kings don't usually die of natural causes in this period of time. So, And he is a very deeply pious man, and so it's his morality centers the play and really does provide the center of the play. If you look at his monologue at the Battle of...
One of them?
I thought I was going to say Towton, but I don't think it's Towton.
It might have been Towton.
I
can't remember. It's one of the big ones,
I think it might be. Because Towton was the bloodiest battle, as we talked about. It was the worst battle ever fought on English soil. Yeah. And so his monologue there is really the heart of the play, I think, if you look at it that way. Yeah. So I think that kind of leads into another one of my points about a strength of the play, is that the characterization is kind of good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I was quite captivated by Henry, as I mentioned.
Yep. Margaret?
Queen Margaret is...
We'll definitely be talking about her.
For sure. Well, why not now?
Okay, sure.
Let's list them off. Henry, Margaret, we've got Richard, you got Edward.
Edward's... Yeah, okay. I wouldn't initially list him. That's all. I found he was kind of flat. But
I think it's interesting that he comes to, even though he is kind of a one-note character, his actions, which are so historically true, really do drive the rest of the plot, and you don't necessarily see it coming. Yeah. Right?
Well, because his character isn't built that well.
No,
that's part of the problem,
probably,
right?
but it is true to the historical fact of it, right? Yes. So let's start with Henry, the king. Yeah. As I said, he kind of felt more sympathetic. He is plagued by, I don't know how to put this.
Yeah, it's not quite indecision. He's realized he is no longer a political actor. Yeah. So he's very happy to be a pawn. Yes. It essentially is what it boils down to. At one point he's railing against, life's injustices and the injustice of him being forced to make kingly decisions. And then he just, right away, he's like, oh, I'll just follow my wife wherever she goes. Yeah. That's what makes me happy. Right. And so he's willingly given up. When he's crowned again by Warwick, the kingmaker, brings him back and he says, well, I don't want to be king. You can take over work. And then, he's literally that upfront about it. He's just like, I don't want to be king. And I'm very sad that I have to be.
I think it's really cool that you have this playing out on a stage in a play where there's an actor cast in a role playing a character who is miscast in his role. I think there's some really cool meta shit going on there. Like, I don't think that Henry VI was meant to be king because of his lineage. Yeah. But he was never supposed to play that role. Yeah. He was never going to be a good king. No. It was just not part of his makeup. No. And I think that is kind of interesting, and I would love to see this performed in that way, with that in mind, having a miscast actor maybe or something. Or
well,
having
initially he was, right? When we watched the BBC productions,
that's exactly true.
This guy's 55 years old.
Yeah, he's supposed to be playing a 9-month-old baby. Yeah. No, not really. But so yeah, and he does kind of represent, like we said, that moral center of the play. In his speeches, the monologue that he gives, but also in the decisions that he does make. So in the very first scene, the opening scene, Richard, Duke of York, and his sons and followers
I already described this text.
Okay, you did 15 seconds of it. Yeah. But they've broken into the throne room, and the king comes to kind of interrupt their celebration, and he makes this deal where he says, the Yorkist line will be my inheritors. Yeah. I will disinherit my own son in order to prevent further bloodshed. And it's kind of a shrewd move. It's something that, if that had actually happened and played out, you wouldn't have 30 years of political strife. You wouldn't have had however many tens of thousands of people dying on these major battles in the middle of the 15th century. So it plays very well into his almost pacifism, which is a weird thing to have in a king, but he is kind of pacifistic. He's very moralistic. He's a Christian, a deeply Christian king who could have been a saint, and in fact, some of the people at the time believed that he was a saint. That's what explained the stupors he would go into. He was receiving messaging from God and stuff, right? Because that's historically accurate as well.
Although not mentioned.
Not mentioned in the play, but so he takes on this kind of aura, I think, of watching it as a modern audience. You can kind of see that there's some wisdom. There's deep wisdom in that he wants to avoid all this bloodshed. Yeah. And of course, it's Richard who breaks the vow, and his wife Margaret who breaks the vow. Yeah. He doesn't break the vow. No. He holds very true
steadfast
to it.
The entire time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that it's very interesting that it's those two characters who barrel forward and start attacking each other again, almost behind his back. But instantly, as soon as basically the scene is over, Richard and his sons are waging war on Margaret. Yep. Margaret's marching on their castle. I mean, nobody cares. He is such an ineffectual king, and that's kind of a tragedy in a sense, that here's this king who tried very hard to be a good leader. And even when he's restored to the throne and he's talking to Exeter, or one of his people,
subjects,
when he's under guard in London. Yeah. He says, why would the people want Edward over me? Even though they've wronged me, I've never raised an army against them. I understand I'm not, delaying decisions because I'm vengeful towards them. why would they prefer Edward over me? Like, he genuinely doesn't understand it. Yeah. And that's also a failing as a king, but it's something virtuous as a person.
Yeah, exactly.
So I kind of like that.
Well, and that's the thing, is that whole character is built around being ill-suited to be a king, to being a good person. And that does provide that moral centering for the play, which is not unique amongst Shakespearean plays. There's usually a character that fulfills that purpose. The fact that it's the titular character in this play who has no agency whatsoever is the interesting part, because that moral center is completely sidelined. Yeah. And that's what a civil war does, right? Yeah. Like, that's what Shakespeare's kind of getting across in here, is that everybody can kind of realize, and after watching this performance, that Henry was the good guy, and not only does he get murdered by Richard III, but he gets tossed to the side. He's abandoned. Even his own servants, when he explains that beautiful passage where he's like, "Oh, you guys are like this tuft of fur or whatever it is that I've blown on the wind, and it comes back to me based on the other wind, and you're just tossed back and forth between the winds, and you don't really even understand what it is that a king does." It's it's a fairly telling passage, and he's trying to like explain it to these people, and then at the end of that scene, he's like, "But I'll go wherever you want." Yeah. He has that moral clarity. Yeah. But he's not empowered to even explain it to the people that in a way that they'll understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that this is kind of an example of Shakespeare, the playwright, or the group of playwrights who wrote this play under the name of Shakespeare, how they take a historical thing, a historical event, and kind of extrapolate it and graft it onto modern events and modern ideals, right? So you have a king who is typifying more, I hate to use the word pacifistic again, but nonviolent strategies, with a populace that is starting to embrace that kind of ideals, right? They don't want to be at war. They've seen the aftermath of this war. They maybe didn't live through it themselves, but they know people in their families who may have died in these wars, 2-3 generations earlier. A strain of humanism is kind of grafting through this. Yep. And I think that's kind of an early example of Shakespeare adapting for his audience in a way that they would understand that it's the same way that we take a play like Richard III and turn it into an allegory for the World War, or something like that. Richard III becomes Hitler or something like that. So that's kind of interesting to see it happening at that time. And I wish I knew more about the history of this specific history. Is that might be something we can
you mean delve the source into materials that
the source material, but also what was going on in the social mind of the people who would be watching these plays. How would they
Shakespeare's time?
How would they have actually been viewing this, right? Because he was writing it for them, but he was also writing it for the descendants of the one who would eventually come to the throne, who we meet at the very end of this. So Henry Tudor, who became Henry VII, but. Let's talk about Queen Margaret and Edward IV, and maybe by extension, Richard the.
Well, let's
Richard
talk about Margaret first, because I want to talk about Richard.
Let's do it.
Stand a little bit. So
not Richard III. I'm talking about Edward IV's father.
Oh, okay.
Who is kind of the start of, it's him versus Queen Margaret, but then when he dies, it's Edward IV. So they're kind of the same. They represent the same.
It's true.
Aim,
right? They are the White Roses. Yeah. So, and Margaret is a really interesting character in this play in particular because she takes on the warlike role. Yeah. She is the manly figure that Henry VI is not. Yeah. And she basically pursues and generates the entire strain of activities that lead to the wars writ large, and eventually Henry's re-imposition on the crown right before he loses it again. So it's a really interesting arc for this character that we met again in part 1 as just a woman who was in love with the Earl who was sent to pick her out of obscurity. Yeah. And here she goes through the whole range of victory to very, very rough defeat when her son Edward is killed in front of her. That's kind of the end of her character, and it's a very brutal ending in that sense.
Yeah, it is, and especially for someone who, I mean, I don't love her, but I like her a lot as a female character, because she does embody kind of all of the things that I like about Lady Macbeth.
But she's more active.
But she's way more active.
She's like
leading the armies.
Yeah.
And at one point in this play, she actually chides her husband, like the king, King Henry VI. She's like, get off the battlefield. You're demoralizing our troops. My troops.
Yeah.
Like
they do better when I'm just
so she's leading these armies.
Yeah. She wins that battle, by the way.
She does. Like, this is what's crazy. Now, I don't know about the historical fact of this.
I don't think she led
I can't. I would think we would know more about her if she did, but this is something we will look up when we actually post this episode. We'll look this up and add to the
notes.
But yeah, so that's really fascinating that she's this powerful, active figure who does, and it's commented on when she kills Richard, Duke of York. One of her soldiers, Clifford, whose father was killed in part 2 by
Duke of York.
By the Duke of York. He's killed the Duke of York's youngest son, the Earl of Rutland, and he's just a young boy, and the Duke of York is aghast at this, and he's condemning, because Margaret takes a cloth that's been soaked in the Rutland's blood and hands it to him and say, dry your tears. If you can cry over this, dry your tears with this. And the Duke of York is just aghast. He's like, women are, and he lists off all the things that women are supposed to be in contrast to what she is. Yeah. And I think it's such a fantastic scene that in the version we watched, so the I forget the name of the director, but it's the BBC from 1983, I think. Yeah. The actress who plays Margaret plays it very stone-faced. Like, her expression does not change as he's listing off this litany of reasons why she is not a woman, why she's hardly a human, because even the worst wretch wouldn't do this. And it's just like she's completely desexed in order to play this role. I don't know. I just think it's, as a powerful female figure, even though she does horrible, horrible things, I think it's kind of inspiring, because she doesn't, again, like we talked about in our Women of Shakespeare episode, and a few other places elsewhere, I think, in our episode where we talked about our favorite characters. She's not someone who has to hide her femininity, even though she's been desexed, like, in a way, and is viewed as a male dominant figure almost. She's still a woman. She's still a mother. She doesn't hide the fact that she is a woman. It almost becomes one of the many things in her arsenal, because nobody would suspect that a woman would do this, and yet she's doing it, you know? So it's something that is kind of like Joan of Arc in part 1.
Yeah, to an extent, except for there's not the moral condemnation,
not
except
at
for
all.
Except for that speech, really, that focuses on her gender, whereas the Joan of Arc, is burned at the stake and called a witch and a whore and all these other things.
She does get her comeuppance.
She does get her comeuppance, and it is in a very kind of, it highlights her femininity in a sense that it's her son that's murdered in front of her. But she's not explicitly condemned by all the rest of the cast for being a warrior woman type, right?
No, like they shrink back from her when they charge forward on something. She tells them, even the people who are coming to kill her at the end, like under orders of Edward IV, she's like, no, you stop, like,
and they listen,
back off, and exactly. So it's kind of. Yeah,
and it is interesting that she's taken on this role, because in the first 2 plays she has a political role, definitely, especially in part 2. She's the one who's kind of setting in motion a lot of things that piss people off and eventually drive the Yorkists to revolt. But
her presence is all that's needed to drive the Yorkists.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the very fact that she married the king is enough for them to hate her, and so she's kind of not concerned about their perception of her.
No, she just leans into it. She's like, well,
exactly.
fine. If you want to call me a wolf wrapped in a woman's hide, then
I'm going to bite you.
Or a tiger wrapped in a woman's hide. Yeah. Then I'm confusing the metaphors, because they also call her the she-wolf of France. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. But she's like, then fine, then I'll eat your face. Yeah. And she does. Yeah. So it's kind of inspiring in a way. Yeah. You should be worried, Aidan.
Are you? But you're comparing yourself to Margaret?
No, I'm just saying it's something that I want to aspire to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I support you. She-wolfing.
Yeah, she's pretty badass. How about let's talk about Richard and his son Edward.
Yeah. Well, Richard, again, because he dies fairly early in the play.
Yeah.
He loses, I think, the second battle. I don't remember. It's the one where he's like, oh, what do we have to worry about? A woman general. And then she captures and kills him.
Yeah.
And again, his character, because you have the weight of part 2 especially. Yes. But his driving ambition is what kind of drove, again, all the way from part 1, the rivalry. Like he picked the white rose from the wall and said, you guys are with me, you're wearing white rose, right? Yeah. About some obscure legal matter, which still bothers me to this day. But anyways, so in that sense, if you carry that weight with you, if you just saw this play on its own, I don't think he would stand up as a character very much at all.
No.
Again, he seems semi-reasonable in the sense that he allows Henry to take back the throne, and he'll just inherit when Henry dies.
Yeah.
But then he's quickly, like, it takes like 3 lines of Richard's to convince him, oh yeah, okay, let's go claim the crown again.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really make much sense outside of that context.
He almost seems, if you look at this play in isolation, he almost is a mirror of Henry, but on the Yorkist side.
Yeah.
In that he's very easily blown which way he goes, which doesn't hold necessarily from the second play, where he is very forthright in his, and even, you know, for me, I'm like, well, no, he has a better claim to the throne, even though he descends from a strange branch, or, you know, of that Plantagenet tree. Yeah. He does have a better claim to the throne. It's remarked on by Warwick, I think, that Henry's claim is 32 years old or 60 years old or something like that. 62. Is that what it is?
I think it's...
That's 62?
Is that 62?
Because a score is 20.
20, is it?
I think so. So 60-some years?
British.
I don't know. It was a fortnight ago. That sounds... Not the game fortnight.
Yeah, I know.
The 2-week period.
Yes.
Anyway. So he does... I mean, ostensibly, he has a better claim to the throne, or he has a strong claim to the throne. And Henry even recognizes that if the Yorkist side is allowed to press their case to the people, Richard will win them over on the merits alone. Yeah. So, but you don't necessarily, and even though that happens in this play, you don't necessarily have the weight of it and the weight of his conviction behind it. So yeah, I agree with you that in isolation, he's a little bit muddled.
And the same kind of goes for Edward IV.
Yeah.
He's a bit muddled only in the sense that his character and his flaws come out very quickly, abruptly, and then disappear, and he's kind of won back the crown.
Yeah. Like, he starts off as just the son of the Duke of York, and then when father dies, like, you can see he has a commanding presence, and they cast it well. There's a Clive Owen looking character in the BBC version, brash, which matches the description of Edward IV as being very handsome and dashing, right? Yeah. But then as soon as he becomes the Duke of York himself, takes over his father's role, a lot of the I don't want to call them megalomaniacal, but they are kind of like, he's very cocky. Yeah. And his wooing of Elizabeth Woodville, or Lady Grey as she's named in the play, happens very quickly.
Very forthright.
Forthrightly.
But it's, I think one of his brothers says, he's the worst wooer in Christendom or something like that, because he's so upfront about it.
Right. And that, I mean, I don't know how that squares. I mean, I think from the historical record,
he was quite charming.
It was very charming. And Elizabeth Woodville was not an old woman. Like, even though she's a widow, she's not, like, she was young and fairly attractive, and the only reason that he married her was because she wouldn't allow him to sleep with her, which comes out in the play, but it's all covered in one very quick scene almost. And their witty banter is not the same kind of witty banter that we've seen
hardly any
but that's supposed to pass off as
the witty banter,
as flirting, right? So we don't, but I still think that what he represents is that the Yorkist claim and the power of having the people behind you, kind of.
Because every time he is knocked off the throne or the perch, and he just raises an army instantly again, and the people flock to his banners. And that's the most common refrain, is that people want Edward IV to be king.
Exactly. And it's less because, I probably in real life it was less because of Edward's charms and more because of Henry being incompetent and incapacitated at times. Yeah. But in the play, it kind of, I mean, I think that does come across, that he is he's charming in his forthrightness, I think, and he's powerful, and there is a likability to him in a certain way. Like even when he's screwing over the King of France, you know, and when he sends Warwick off to woo the daughter of the King of France to make this alliance, which would be very politically astute, and it's Warwick's plan, and it embarrasses the hell out of Warwick when he gets word that Edward has actually married Elizabeth Woodville instead. You can see how Warwick has so much allegiance to this man, right? And then to see how crestfallen he is that this allegiance has been dashed because he's made a fool of him. Yeah. And this is also historically true because Warwick immediately shifts allegiance to Henry VI and gets Henry VI back on the throne. Yeah. So Edward IV, I think, is an interesting character. Warwick is maybe a more interesting character. We haven't talked about Warwick a lot.
I didn't find Warwick interesting at all because he's so easily swayed. And his in real life, we covered this in our War of the Roses episode, is that he was so ambitious that, you know, nothing was ever going to satisfy him. And here you don't get that sense of ambition because the play wouldn't allow for another character with another set of motives. Right. It's already 3.5 hours long. Yeah. If he needed a huge monologue and then to suddenly nod and move people around, it would have been 4.5 hours.
But really. I don't think that was part of his. I mean, it probably was a little bit in the historical record.
Well, I think he was kind of like portrayed as the baddie in a lot of the historical records. Even now, it's kind of like, well, Warwick is the one. He's the kingmaker. You know, at the end of the day, if he didn't have that ambition to be the guy who helps the guy get on the throne, none of this would have happened.
Right.
So I feel like that's there and it's hinted at in the play, but his character never really comes into his own as a driving force for any of these.
And that might be because in terms of the characterization, you already have a character who is very steadfastly moral in Henry VI. So to have a character like Warwick who is just
amoral and
like chaotic neutral, or I don't know how you would.
Yeah. I don't know.
Can you be chaotic and lawful on the D&D alignment chart?
I'm sure, maybe.
Anyway, he's kind of he does seem like an opportunistic person. But he's good at it, so you kind of give him a pass for it.
Yeah, and he does, like, he flatters his way back into the good books of Margaret and stuff.
Well, he doesn't even, he just basically lays himself prostrate at her feet and is like, take me back, and she's like, all right, let's do this.
Let's make a king again, And that's the thing, so I think in comparison to Edward, Warwick is not as well developed either, but neither of them are really that interesting to me because they don't have the sense of self-awareness that the other characters do. Yeah. Especially Henry and my favorite, Richard.
Yes.
Because here you get the hints. Like, you can see the parts of Richard Shakespeare probably wrote, because this is the Richard that we get in Richard III. He's self-aware. He hates the world because the world did him bad by being born. He's very clearly, like, he'll wink and nod at the audience all the time about, like, well, Judas kissed Jesus too after he kisses his nephew Edward, the eventual Edward VI, or Edward V. Sorry. So, like, he has this kind of, speaking of D&D alignment chart, he's kind of like neutral evil kind of thing, where he'll play the cards, but he's pure evil underneath.
Yeah.
And so that makes him an interesting villain in a sense, because he's kind of helping Edward, who's kind of lawful, neutral thing. I don't know. He's a good guy, but not super great, because he wants to sleep with women all the time. Yes. And he has a negative side to him too. So Richard kind of fosters that along. And so what makes Richard really interesting in my books is that scene when he and Henry meet and he murders Henry. Yeah. Because these are the diametrically opposed characters. Yes. Like, Henry is lawful good, maybe chaotic neutral or chaotic evil for Richard, and it's basically that. Henry gives his long-winded speech about what is good, and I shouldn't have to suffer you here because I'm a king and I'm good, and heaven will look after me kind of stuff. And then Richard's just like, screw you, you're talking too much, and he just stabs him to death. And that's kind of the end of it. And it's a good summary of where those two characters kind of wind up, and I thought that was actually the most interesting scene in a lot of ways, because of those two characters.
And I think I would agree with you that that's really interesting, but what I loved most about Richard III's character was, and I again agree with you that you can see Shakespeare's fingerprints all over this, because one of his first monologues that he gives is when he talks about how he's misshapen, how he has no grace. It was taken from him in his mother's womb, and he talks about all of his physical deformities and his the perceived moral deformity, I guess, or moral lack that people with disabilities, physical disabilities, would have been branded with exactly in this time period that continues up to this day, basically. So it reminded me so much of the opening monologue in Richard III. Now is the summer of our discontent, made glorious summer by the son of York. And he goes into he hits a lot of the same notes, right, about what makes him lacking and what makes his brother so much better. And this is where it comes in. He's comparing himself to both of his brothers, really. And we do see that split between the Duke of Clarence and King Edward IV, which eventually leads to the Duke of Clarence murder, because he ends up aligning himself with Henry VI, but and is drowned in a vat of wine. Oh, I missed that part. Okay. No, it doesn't happen in the play. No, I know that. History, in history, I didn't realize that. Okay. So it's interesting in that way that there's a lot of the seeds of Richard III are planted here for Richard, Duke of Gloucester, in this play, but you can kind of trace the thread through. I'm really interested to reread Richard III now, and to watch The Hollow Crown too, which kind of puts these all together, because really the Wars of the Roses don't end until the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 with Richard III being defeated by Henry Tudor, who is introduced at the very end of this play as a young boy who is the cousin or nephew or something of Henry VI. He's like a half nephew. Because it's like a half brother who gave birth. It's his. Yeah, exactly. It's his brother. His half brother's son, who Henry eventually puts on the throne because his own son is dead and gone now. But so there's a lot of really interesting things about Richard, and I love the way that the first half of the play really does deal with this vengeance idea and this measure for measure, eye for an eye thread that really comes to a head when you get that battle scene where you have all the instances leading up to it too, with Clifford killing Rutland and just lots of your father killed my father, so I'm going to kill you. But then it switches all of a sudden to this personal ambition when you get the introduction of Richard as a strong character. And that really, this is what's most interesting about this play, is these character moments, right? And that's where Shakespeare really excels, is when you get Henry delivering a monologue that, even though it's a bit trite and dramatic, he's talking about how he wishes he could just be a farmer. And you're like, yeah, I get it. I want you to have that too. Like, how awesome is that? How awesome would that be? Or you get Richard saying, I'm a deformed... No one wants to have sex with me. He's like the proto-incel, He just goes on a rampage because, Reddit red pill community said to do so. But I mean, in reality, it's the most compelling moment because it feels real. It feels it's compelling. Real motivation. Yeah, it is, and that's something most of the other characters lack. Is besides vengeance, they have no motivation because they're just running through killing people, or they're setting out to regain the throne because it was theirs to begin with, and there's no real reason for it. It's just, that's mine. I want it. And you usurped it. Well, technically my grandfather did. So and what is that? Like, it doesn't. Yeah, like all the arguments about kingship and stuff. They're not very well done here, except for Henry's kind of monologues on the subject. The other approach is kind of the Richard approach, which is like, I want it. I'm going to take it. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the throne. Which you can look at the historicity of it, and you can say that all kind of started with the usurpation of Richard II, which is alluded to lots of times in these plays. And even in the historical record, it's hinted at that once you've deposed a king, it makes it easy to depose future kings. And we haven't had a deposition of a king since, I don't know, when was the last time a king was deposed? Probably. James II? Yeah. I don't think they've had one since. I guess you're right. Yeah, Cromwell. Oh, no, I guess it... no, after that with the Orange, William and... Yeah, they Anne invited them over. They didn't... Mary of Orange? Yeah, William and Anne of Orange. Whatever, the Orange king and queen. The Dutch ones. Yeah. But they were invited over by the Parliament. Right? Quote unquote invited over. Yeah, okay. This isn't a 18th century podcast. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it just... once you've done it once, it makes it easier to happen. But even though these people have fairly even but different claims to the throne, none of them have a convincing moral argument for why they should be the king, except for Henry. So, but he's a bad king. But he's a bad king, so it does make it quite conflicting. But it's to get back to the character moments. That's what is compelling. It's not the actions of the characters. It's what motivates their actions that really makes that sing. So.
Why, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrown upon them.
So, failings of the play? Yeah. Do you have an idea of what you didn't like, or what really grinded your gears? I think ground your gears?
Ground my gears? Yeah, past tense of grinded is groaned. So what groaned my gears this time, I think we've touched on most of it already, but those back and forth battles, again, are kind of tedious, and I thought they were better done in production this time than in part one, because they showed a lot more off screen. It was a lot of and even the play itself has that, where a character will rush onto stage and say, "Oh, I can't believe this happened. We're gonna have to keep fighting, but oh man, I don't know if I can do it." There was a bit more of that, which was nice. But yeah, the back and forth battles again, and the fact that those battles kind of negated all political posturing. Everything was decided through a feat of arms, not through individual character moments. That's something, again, to go back to Game of Thrones, it managed to combine a little more expertly, all the big political backstabbings, like the Red Wedding was done partly because, the Freys got screwed over by the Starks. So it was a personal thing that had political ramifications and was expressed politically and personally. And here the political machinations happen and start off to be personal, and then there's a giant army and they come and wipe everybody out, which is, again, probably more true to history because these battles were actually fought as opposed to a Red Wedding-esque stabbing in the back, literally. So I think that aspect of it hurts the sense of movement within the play, because you don't really get attached to any one political outcome because it's just going to be another battle. And the play also doesn't do a great job of kind of grounding the audience in that back and forth sense. So it literally just keeps happening, and every time you're like, oh well, maybe this will be the thing, this will be the political decision / murder that solves everything, and it really doesn't. So that those two aspects alone kind of overwhelm the whole structure of the play. Some of the writing wasn't great as well, I found. Like you were saying, the very heavy-handed, never has a son wept for a father more, never has a son or a father wept for a son more, never has a king wept for his country more. That stuff is very, it's just so on the nose that it was kind of painful to read and watch. But then there were other parts that reeked a little bit more of Shakespeare and had that nuance that were okay. But the writing, again, was lacking at times, although there were, again, some great insults. I mean, that's one thing about these Henry plays has been joyous reading all those insults. So.
Yes, it has been.
What about you, though? Did you have any other pain points that you noticed?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the battle scenes, because they are really tricky to do well. And it's hard. I mean, Shakespeare himself would write that these are things, almost write apologies. A lot of the time, Shakespeare did this in prologues or in asides. To say, we're limited by what we can do here. So a lot of these battles have to be depicted off stage, or by having characters come in and depict it, or read it out loud, or whatever. You're using words to talk about actions that are visual. And I was reading the essay that comes with the Folger edition, the ebook that we were reading, talks a little bit about some different stagings that have been done, not just of this play, but I think referencing, Akira Kurosawa, and how battle scenes are done in Kurosawa films, and how they evoke something that's you're not watching a literal battle. And I think that's why I hate battle scenes, because I don't need to see every strike or every blow of the hammer or sword or whatever. The director of the BBC production is Jane Howell, by the way. Yes. And that production does some interesting things with really dramatic shots. It's clearly not on a stage. It's done on a sound stage. It's done with black backgrounds, and you see banners going, and you see, fade ins and fade outs, and the final battle is set during a snowstorm, which is a unique take. I don't know. Well, I think it was true. It was historically true.
Battle of Tewkesbury was in May, so I don't think it was true.
Was Tewkesbury the last battle that we see on?
I'm pretty sure.
Either way, there was a battle that was fought during the winter, and so even conflating the two, like, it does make for some striking visuals.
Yeah.
But again, you're limited by what you can do. So staging a Shakespearean battle scene is going to be difficult no matter what. So you have to kind of take a weird approach to it almost to make it work. And I was reading about an article in preparation for this about how these plays would have been staged and how other productions have gone about it. And it was written in the early years of the Second Gulf War. So talking about how this is exactly the time that we need to be talking about war. Yeah. So Shakespeare's plays, especially these history plays, are important to talk about or important to put on. And there was a production that was done in London, I think in Haymarket, a production of a play called Rose Rage, which is kind of conflating the Henry VI plays into two performances. Okay. And it was set, at least this production that they were talking about, which I think was from 2001. They were writing about it in 2004, I think. But in 2001, it was put on, and they set it in a Victorian butcher shop. And so you had butchers on stage with intestines and with, things like that represent the carnage in a way that just having people yelling and brandishing their rapiers or whatever doesn't do, or having someone run in with a banner with a red rose and a banner with a white rose and have them. But you can do interesting things with that. This production stays quite literal, I think, even though there are some interesting visuals to it. But I find it hard to fault a Shakespearean play for the battle scenes, even though they're boring and they're kind of dry, because it is so hard to do, and you have to do it. You can't just ignore it. So I don't know. I think I'm not pushing back against that being one of the worst parts, because it is one of the worst parts. Objectively, it's hard to get through. Yeah. I just don't know. I can't offer a constructive alternative. Yeah. Unless you go like interpretive dance or something, like,
Well, or I mean, if you go big budget, modern Hollywood-esque, you could show the battle in its full disturbing glory and then just have these extra scenes or cut those scenes. And
I do wonder about the artistic requirement for that.
Yeah, definitely.
There's no need to be gratuitous about it.
No, and you're definitely changing the nature of the storytelling by doing that, right? So it is a choice.
Ooh, another production I read about where they had in the consecutive battles, like they would use, or maybe they would mix them up. They would have like modern weapons and the ancient weapons at the same time to show how maybe war isn't all that different then as it is now, or something. Like you can do that, on stage, interesting ways. Yeah. But sorry, I cut you off. I had to say it before I forgot.
That's totally a good point.
Apart from that, I think the other thing that does kind of rub me the wrong way is just condensing so much into one play.
Wow.
When you have part one that really is this drawn out lead up to what is really the most interesting parts happen after that. Yeah. Like why couldn't the trilogy have started with part two? Yeah. Part three could be part two, and then you could have part three be like the next part be like split these battles up a bit or something, like have the passage of time not be so constricted.
There is, and that is the hardest part of watching the play without wildly adapting the thing to say, like, 6 years later title card passes by, or you have a messenger come on and say it's been 6 years since that battle at blah blah blah, like you could do things like that to help the audience understand the passage of time, but the character trite. And it's trite, and the characters don't really allow for it within the dialogue. Like they're saying, Warwick and the Queen are both talking to the King of France, and then that scene doesn't happen for 2 or 3 scenes later.
Right, but meanwhile you've got Edward
kids.
leaving the stage, and Richard, who was just talking to Edward, sitting down and talking about Edward and his wife's son who hasn't been born yet because this play just condensed 6 years into 30 seconds.
Yeah, so things like that. Like, I mean, that is a hindrance to enjoying the play. But I again, there's limited options for how to really fix that. And that's probably something that Shakespeare in his later plays adapted a bit better, I find. Yeah. Is that, you know, he picks singular moments. You know, Henry V, it's not the entire life of Henry V. It's, we're going to go invade France. Here's Agincourt. Here's the other battle. I can't remember the name of her. And here's him wooing Catherine. Yeah, right. And that's it. Yeah. And that is a much better story, because you're like, okay, here's a king whose whole thing is to get the throne of France, and let's watch him do it.
And I think that represents two things. It's the growth of Shakespeare as an author, but I think it also typifies his reliance on source material, which, I mean, up until, well, even to this day, we know that there's probably more than one author of this play, but there's evidence that it may have even been based on a play by Robert Greene. Oh, yes. Which was published in 1595, interestingly titled The True Tragedy of Richard, Duke of York. Mm-hmm. So it takes the opposite view of this downfall of a great Plantagenet king, which lines up very nicely with the eventual ruler at the time the play was put on. Yeah. Because this the rightful succession of that line, which led to Elizabeth. But
and this one is, I mean, Shakespeare's approach generally with the Lancastrians and the York is much more balanced. It is very much a pox on both their houses kind of thing, because as good as Henry VI is as a person, he is a bad king. He makes no real bones about that. And Margaret is not, a virtue of femininity.
She might be a great military leader, but she's
not a good woman and a good queen. And neither is, York. No, not York. Edward kills his nephew or whatever, Henry VI's son in cold blood with no, nobody is really a good person in this play except for Henry. But Henry's not a good king. So the play's very even in its kind of condemnation of everybody, which he can only do because the Tudors were a combination of both houses. So you can kind of Shakespeare has that license to say, well,
they were good on both but bad on both.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me that the play this may have been based on was listed the tragedy of Richard, Duke of York.
Exactly, which probably leaned a little more towards the Yorkists being good, perhaps, or something like that. Right?
And I mean, I obviously haven't read it. Greene wrote it. And maybe that's part of the reason he was so critical of Shakespeare in A Groat's Worth of Wit, which is where the tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide quote came from. Yeah. But if he used that as a source, as a young writer, or younger writer anyway, you're going to stick a lot closer to the source material if you have it. So, I mean, as he matures as a writer and you go through the later plays, if this play had been written, or if you look at the second tetralogy, the major tetralogy that comes later, it's much clearer that Henry V, for example, is a much better play. The 3 parts of Henry IV are much...
2 parts of Henry IV.
Sorry, 2 parts of Henry IV, Henry V. Yeah. They're written much better.
Yes.
Haven't read Richard II, so I can't speak to that
one.
But,
it's a little bit better, but it's still buried a little bit in the historical muck, more than the other ones, I think.
So, I think these are all forgivable sins. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, it's hard to criticize them, but it doesn't mean that I love it. Yeah. So that's just my thinking.
If I longer stay, we shall begin our ancient bickering.
So, as is our tradition, we have our marriage counseling
101
section.
Course here. I guess is it a course?
It's not a course. This is what not to do, maybe?
Not to do. Yeah,
no, I don't know. Yeah. We haven't been divorced yet.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
That's a good point. Maybe it is working.
Yeah.
We are going to debate
the same question.
Wait, I didn't say that right. We are going to debate the same question that we debated way back in, was it part 1 or was it in the Wars of the Roses?
It was Wars of the Roses.
Who was the better king?
Yes.
Edward IV or Henry VI.
Yes.
And if you remember, if you are a loyal listener and you remember our episode, whichever one that was, we don't even remember it. So how could you remember it? Was it Wars of the Roses?
That one,
okay.
Yeah.
I took the side that Edward IV was the better king because he was good looking.
And he had a better claim.
He had a better claim, yes.
You spent a lot of time
I did. I
even
convinced you that he may have a better claim.
Yes,
to
I
the throne.
did. And then I shut down the rest of the argument pretty quickly. But yes.
You took the side that Henry VI
was better king because he was a bad king, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but it did back then. So
we're going to switch it up this time because when in talking about this, we've come to the realization that our views have changed. Much like Shakespeare's writing process that will change as we go through the plays. We've matured since
And to be clear,
debate.
Yes, to be clear though, we're talking about the characters as presented in these plays, not the historical figures.
Yes.
So, Lindsay, in this case, you are going to expound on the greatness of the pious Henry VI. So I'll allow you to go first.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think, as far as the character of Henry VI goes in the plays that Shakespeare wrote, he's a more balanced king. He's not... No, I won't say balanced because he's not a fighter. He's a lover, not a fighter. But I appreciate that about him, that he has a diplomatic strain to him. And that's something that comes out very early on when he says that, like, words will be my weapons or something. He attempts to diplomatically talk Richard, Duke of York, down from his own throne, from Henry's own throne. And it works until everybody leaves the room. But while you're in his presence, and I found that very captivating as we watched the play. I think this is why Shakespeare needs to be seen, not just read. Because in reading the play, I didn't get this sense. But watching the play with this actor, Peter Benson, who plays King Henry VI in the Jane Howell version. We've talked about him a lot. We should credit him properly. We didn't like him to begin with.
Because he was,
kind of. It was oddly cast, and even when you look at him now, you're like, wow, he looks a lot more like Henry Tudor than Henry VII than he does Henry VI. But either way, by the end of it, his portrayal of Henry VI, when given these deep monologues and the moralistic tone that he takes, I bought it 100%. I was like, this is a guy who wants what's best for his country and truly believes that the best for his country is to not fight. He does not want to empty the country in order to assert his will. He's not going to stand for more civil wars. He hates the fact that these families are fighting. He hates it so much that he's willing to disinherit his own son, which goes against everything that he believes as a king, as a man of God, or an anointed king whose son should follow him. I think that is remarkable. And as far as kings go, as far as leaders go, because you don't often see leaders. Even today, it's something to be remarked upon when you have a leader who takes a measured diplomatic approach. And that's partly because of the sensationalism of current world politics and the news media and the way that this stuff is all presented. But I just found it refreshing to see a king who is measured in his approach and is willing to take the unpopular stance that war is not, especially someone whose father conquered France. You know, his father was this great military leader, and the apple fell so far from the tree it's in another field. But he doesn't apologize for it. Yeah. He wishes that his father had only left him good deeds, not this vainglorious battle legacy or military legacy. So I think that's something remarkable, and especially for a historical king who was reviled and unfairly perhaps demonized for his failings, his mental illness, and his physical incapacity. For Shakespeare to treat that kind of sympathetically almost, to give him kind of the moral mouthpiece to make him the moral mouthpiece of the play, I think he was a special character to Shakespeare too. So that's why I think he's a more successful king in the context of these three plays, or at least in the context of this play.
Okay. I mean, that's not bad.
But I'm wrong.
Well, you are a little wrong. in the sense that he doesn't do anything to become king. So he's not really a successful king in that sense. He just gets tossed to and fro. And at the end, he doesn't even want to be king so much that he just literally abdicates power.
Yep.
So is he a good king? No, because even he knows he's not a good king. So he's kind of defeating your own purpose there. Edward IV, I gotta say, there's not much going for him realistically, but he does want to be king. He does want, and he has some kingly virtues to him.
What?
He's very steadfast. He pursues his goal. He does perhaps not look out for the common person, but he is loved by the common people, and I think that's a sense that they provide a bit of context to his character, is that the people do love him. We talked about this already, but it's that sense provides a bit more grounding for his whole character. The other thing, he's very chivalric. Not so much in his wooing of Lady Grey, Elizabeth Woodville. It's a little less than chivalric, but he does pursue his love. I mean, which is a very chivalric value. He falls in love with her, and he decides to marry her, come what may, even when that leads to more civil war. So in that sense, he's kind of good. He also he's a good military leader, which was very important at the time. And that's all I got. So he's not. I mean, I agree with everything you said. Henry VI is a much more interesting character. Yes. He's a better person. But Edward was a better king in real life, perhaps. And in the play, I get the sense that he was the king that people wanted. He was going to be the one. If Henry came back to power, even in the context of the play, someone who didn't want power is never going to be a good king.
Right.
And that was made clear when he stepped aside to give Warwick power instead. Yeah. Warwick was actually the king. The kingmaker had been made king by Henry VI.
The setter up and puller down of kings.
That's right.
Had been made king himself.
Yes. So I think the play kind of tells you that Edward's the better king.
I'm still going with Henry. I think anyone who's going to be led by his dick as much as Edward IV is not to be trusted.
Yeah. Well, that's most men.
Anyway. So yeah, that was our discussion of the third part of Henry VI.
Yes.
Our next topic will be a kind of a fun topic for us. I think we're going to dive into this myth or this trope of Shakespeare is boring.
Yeah.
Boring old crotchety Shakespeare.
Billy S.
Billy S. No one calls boring people Billy S. They call him William Shakespeare.
Except for Sky Sweetenham, but that's okay.
We're going. That's a deep cut.
That is a 1999,
90s.
2000 era cut right there for you. I think we'll put that as the outro music for this episode.
Jesus. So yes, tune in a couple weeks for our discussion of Shakespeare as boring trope. We hope you enjoyed this discussion. You can find all our episodes on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast fix.
If you want to tell us what you think of Shakespeare, his plays, poems, or any of the topics we discuss, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact us on Twitter, that's @TheBicksPod,
on Facebook at facebook.com/TheBicksPod, or by email at thebickspod@gmail.com. That's our cue to exit.